There's also something enduring about what we're launching today. The 2017 Australian Investor Study is the 16th report in a series that stretches back 3 decades to 1986. It's been here as long as I have in this industry. The longevity of the series offers rich and insightful data into the profiles, attitudes and behaviours of Australian retail investors. 30 years ago, there was little talk of globalisation, self-managed super funds, ethical investing or robo-advising. In fact, in 1986, there wasn't even an ASX. Our birth occurred a year later. The inaugural investor study was actually produced by ASX's forerunner, which was the Australian Associated Stock Exchanges, AASE as I remember it. Today, all of our concepts and instruments feature prominently in the language of retail investing. A factor that has remained constant over the years, though, is the strong awareness Australians have of the benefits of investing on exchange. It used to be investing mainly in the shares of listed companies. It has broadened now to include ETFs, M funds, bonds, warrants, property trusts, listed investment companies, futures, options, and in fact many more. Hence the decision to rename this year's report as the Investor Report instead of the narrower share ownership study. Investor sophistication extends beyond shares alone these days. The investor supermarket of products now available provides not only healthy portfolio diversification for investors, but a vibrant business for ASX and Australia's financial markets industry in general. That's why we think it's important to understand the challenges and opportunities presented by the study's findings. It's also vital that we continue to do all we can to preserve the confidence investors have in our exchange-traded markets. We should never underestimate the dividend we all have for that. So thank you to the millions of Australians who have chosen to transact on the ASX, and thank you to Deloitte Access Economics, which has been an outstanding partner of ASX on this study for the first time. We're grateful too for the panel of experts that have gathered to discuss today's findings, led by Mr Money himself, Paul Clitheroe. The forward of the inaugural investor study in 1986 wrote of the common goal of raising living standards. Raising living standards remains one of the fundamental objectives of investing, and ASX is proud of the role we play in helping to achieve that goal and proud to continue to produce these important studies. So it's my pleasure now to invite John O'Mahony, partner at Deloitte Access Economics, and importantly the co-author of this report, to take us through the highlights from the study. And once again, thank you everyone here today for your interest. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Dominic, for that kind introduction, and for the ASX for convening today's very exciting panel and summit. Deloitte's been very proud to partner with the ASX on this research. It's been a privilege for us to be part of it for 2017, recognising, as Dom said, that in many ways, as researchers, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, a study that's been going on for 30 years and now in its 17th edition. The aim of the research is to answer the questions of the who, why, how and what of investing in Australia. That's always been its job. I think the extra task which we've been set for this edition is to delve deeper into some of the economic and industry context for changing investor trends. Powerful forces changing investment, demographics, technology, globalisation, and just the behavioural changes of investors themselves. And I think in this year's edition, we've tried to twist the story to also focus on what opportunities there are for people in the room, for people in the sector, for investors all around Australia. The report itself doesn't offer direct financial advice, so even if you burrow into some of the many appendices, you won't find a particular recommendation about what to buy or sell, but instead give you some of those higher level trends that we think are affecting the sector. In addition to the report itself, there'll be copies for anybody who's still not online out the back of the session today, if people want to take a copy home with them for their shelves. And in addition to that, this year, as an extra innovation, we've added an online interactive infographic as well. never has learning about investor trends been more exciting than today. So in addition to the report, you can go in and check out all of the demographic changes and profiles which we've got on there. While I'll provide some headlines this morning, there's obviously a lot more detail in the report. I think the report feels like it's got about 150,000 pages in it, but today I'll try to constrain my observations to just what I see as being the 6 biggest trends in investing in Australia today. The first one that struck me as an economist looking at the research was just how important investing is for Australia's economy and society. I think in most of the economic circles that I stroll around in, if you talk about what's driving the economy, people will often nominate a sector. They'll say the mining sector or the construction sector is driving economic activity. I think what this report says is that, in fact, share market investing and on-exchange investing is also the gearbox of the Australian economy, connecting the huge funds available with the many investment opportunities, allowing businesses to grow and expand and build our future. And I'm not sure that that's always recognised in the economic debate. I think the second importance of investing is about income for the future. I think if you turn on the television, you'll see a lot of stories about the future of jobs or the future of work. But the median household in Australia gets 20% of its income from investing. So as important as where the jobs of the future are coming from, there's the question of where are the returns for the future coming from? It's a very important question in a lower yield environment. And the third part of it is just the social component as well. I mean, we've all been to the barbecue and had the property conversation if we live in Sydney. Did you hear that someone bought an apartment in Lakemba last week for $3 million? There's always that conversation that happens at the barbecue, but shares don't always come up as much when you're flipping over a snag on the barbecue. I mean, how many times have you heard someone come up and say, I'm not sure whether to get involved in an ETF or an M fund? So sometimes the investor conversation doesn't go as much to on-exchange investing at the barbecue. But if you look at these figures up here, the first slide, it shows that there are more people with on-exchange investments than there are investors who hold investment property. So really, it's time for share market investing to take its rightful place at the Aussie barbecue. The second observation is a demographic one. The growth of millennial investors, people aged under 34, in Australia. I think the investor conversation has focused a lot, quite rightly, on the baby boomer generation and how their movement into retirement greatly increases the importance of investing in Australia. We've been gifted an extra 25 years of life expectancy beyond the retirement age. And that means that investor income is going to be a lot more important. But alongside that demographic trend, there's the growth of millennials. In just 5 years, the number of millennials who are investing in on-exchange investments, that's shares, infrastructure, REITs, ETFs, all those things, it's doubled in just 5 years under our noses, prompting a question for, I think, the industry about whether you're prepared for, whether you've got the right products and marketing now to tap into that new market opportunity. This is the millennial that we've got in our interactive infographic online. You mightn't recognise her because she doesn't have an iPhone in her hand or tattoos on her arms, but she's our millennial. I make that observation because I think the millennials in our report confound some of the stereotypes that people might think about young investors. Yes, they bring different goals to the marketplace. They're as interested in saving up for a housing deposit through share market investing or planning travel arrangements as they are for preparing for their retirement. But they're also surprisingly a risk-averse cohort, even more risk-averse than people who are in the late stages of their careers or people who are in retirement. And I think it's a conversation for our panel today about just why that is and what opportunities and barriers that presents. The third observation about the Australian investor community is the DIY attitude to investing. The proportion of investors who use professional financial advisors is 45%. The number of people who ask Google what they should be investing in is 48%. That is I think, a remarkable statistic. And there are, of course, many reasons for it. Partly it's financial, and professional financial advice isn't going to stack up for every individual. Cost is a factor. But the biggest reason that people cite for not engaging a financial advisor is actually just about control. It's about control and trust and people wanting to be in charge of their own money. I think that's a question for the industry as well about how we can close that advice gap. I think it's also going to start a conversation today about the role of robo-advice in the marketplace and to what extent that can help put more information in the marketplace while still giving people a sense of control. Fourth observation is about lower yields potentially producing an expectations gap. Over the last 30 years, on-exchange investment returns have averaged about 10% a year, and yet over the last decade, it's only been half that, about 4.5%. Partly that's obviously related to the global financial crisis and the decline in shares around then, and when that moves out of the 10-year cycle, the returns will go up. But people's expectations are still hovering around that 10% mark. And there is a question for the industry going forward about how it can meet shareholder expectations for higher returns when yields have been lower, particularly when risk aversion remains quite high in Australia. The fifth observation is about diversification. Obviously, it's a mantra for the industry and it's very good on paper. Diversification allows people to weather economic events more easily. When one asset goes in one direction, another asset goes in a different one, and their overall returns can be better protected and preserved. But exactly how to achieve it is the subject of discussion and debate, whether diversification is just across Australian equities, whether it's got an international component, whether it's across infrastructure, real estate, or whether it includes direct holdings in property as well. 40% of people who are on-exchange investors reckon that they don't have a diversified portfolio. And the reason for that is fairly clear. It's just that they're not comfortable investing out of the normal staple of property, shares, and cash. And the industry obviously has the job. The people here have a job. The report which we produce today has a job to try to better communicate what some of the other investment opportunities are around. Our report cites that in international terms, diversification is growing, with now 8% of on-exchange investors having direct ownership in overseas shares. Globalisation is coming to share market investing, and it's going to be an important trend for the future, something that the Australian Regional Funds Passport could enhance. And final observation from me is just about the opportunity which the sector has before it. We've got 11 million investors in Australia, but obviously that could be a lot higher. The starting point for a lot of people would just be to better manage their cash flow and actually have some money that they can invest, and also to overcome issues about what they believe is the right amount to invest or how much they need. A lot of respondents to our survey thought that they needed $5,000 or more before they could start investing. And of course, for many people who've been around the sector for a long time would know that even very small amounts on a regular basis can make a big difference over a long period of time. 22,000 financial advisors in Australia, and in a huge finance sector worth about $150 billion to our economy every year. Deloitte Access Economics has predicted that this sector will be one of our fabulous 5 industries, that is one of the top 5 industries for growth over the next couple of decades because of that combination of being a high growth sector and something that Australia has a comparative advantage in. So we see a bright future ahead. Our report provides more grist for that mill, outlining the technology trends, the globalisation trends, the investor trends that are going to see that opportunity become a reality in coming years. So look forward to any questions from the audience today as part of the panel session, or perhaps if they're specific ones, they might be after the session today as well. So with that, it's time for me to click over the slide and introduce a man who obviously doesn't need any introduction to this audience. He's Australia's money man. He's the chair of Money Magazine. He's the head of More Financial financial literacy boards than you can throw a dollar at. He's been asked by Prime Minister after Prime Minister to lead financial literacy charge in Australia. The founder of IPAC Securities. You've seen him on TV, in print, and all over Australia. He's Paul Clitheroe.
We'll do it properly. Okay, we'll do it properly. Look, I'll solve your first problem, John. How do you convince people about 10%? Now, being a boy genius, I know that the rule of 72, so at 10% we double our money every 7.2 years, right? I'll make it 7, call it 10.03 if you like. So a 30-year-old, we were chuckling about, how do you get involved in stuff, and it's really fascinating that my parents, my dad was a country doctor, and if you wonder why I give some of this really common sense advice, it's just common sense works. Luckily for me, common sense is really rare, thank God. But Dad and Mum would buy probably the equivalent of about $100 a year of shares, myself, my sister, and they were things like, stuff, Woolworths or Coles, Woolworths wasn't around back then, it was Burns Phillip, I think. Coles was certainly there. And it was really fascinating, and in a sense, when Vicky, my wife of 34 years, and I got married, I was starting IPAC, so I had no money, but luckily Vicky was a school teacher. And reluctantly, our bank told us to nick off because they said, you've only got one stable stream of income and she'll get pregnant any day now, buzz off. Thank God the world's changed, people, seriously. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? Luckily, a building society had started called St George, and it lent us some money. And we got a tiny little semi on a very busy road in Artarmon, which we were just so thrilled to have that. But the opportunity to start IPAC came up, and this little $100 odd or so a year that had been going on since I was 7 or 8 years old, it turned into about $22,000. And I sold that $22,000 at age 27. I needed $20,000 to kick IPAC off. And funnily enough, my parents putting a few dollars into shares gave me an interest, a career, and it's just extraordinary how it happened. So what did I do as a parent? Started putting money to shares for our 3 kids. And here's how I'm going to solve your 10% problem. I was mentioning that, in a sense, look, you need a bit of luck in life as well. But my now 30-year-old son, he works at PIMCO in Singapore, his career has been defined by what I do and what my parents did for me and what we've done for him. This is really more than money. This is really interesting behavioural stuff, which I find fascinating. And so where he got a bit lucky is that I think by then it wasn't $100 a year, it might have been $500 a year that Mum and Dad had put aside and grandparents to do Christmas money. He was a bit lucky because when all this started for him as a now 30-year-old, the Commonwealth Bank was floating. And I'm not a big believer in diversification for 8-year-old children. I can't see a lot of point. I think the whole idea is, as I did with IPAC, you actually here I am banging on about risk diversification, which we'll talk to the panel about, and I'll finish in 1 second. But in a sense, when you're young, risk is your friend. You can recover. Right now, at nearly 62, risk is not my friend anymore. I'm not starting again. You change. So basically, this has worked well for him, and he's never got round to selling those shares at $500 a year plus dividend reinvestment. He only had initially 1 share, which was the floater Commonwealth Bank. And it's really fascinating, and I appreciate this is a bit of an outlandish example, it happens to be true. That $500 plus top-up Christmas money and stuff, plus dividend reinvestment, he's now got about $95,000 worth of Commonwealth Bank shares. What's it called? It's the only truth in money. Compound interest. It's about the only true miracle on the planet. How can we teach more people this miracle? All the rest is bullshit, of course. It's lies, thieves and crooks. No, there's another truth, fees. That's why I can stand here today so confidently. Our industry is also good at that, and that's where robo-advice and low fees is really interesting. I'm also chairman of InvestSmart. We'll come to that sort of stuff later on. So, answer your question before I introduce the panel. If my son at 30 has now got, let's say he's got $100,000 and he's expecting 10% or fractionally over, and also you hit the nail on the head, the 25 years extra. So statistically, if there's no improvement in life expectancy, he's already at about 86. We all know that over the last 168 years, we're living 3 months longer for every year you survive. Yes, in the 1840s, women in the world's 3 longest living countries, Norway, Sweden and Japan, died on average at 42. Men died at 38. That's not BC, that's 168 odd years ago. Extraordinary difference. So he can invest longer, and doesn't compound interest work? You're the economist, not me. Doesn't compound work? So if he puts his 100 grand aside expecting 10%, this I did with my pencil, I didn't need a calculator for this. I thought it was fun though. I was doing this while you were talking rudely. So at 30, he's got 100. At 37, he gets his 10%. He's had his 7 years, he's got 200. 43, he's got 400. 50, he's got 800. 57, he's got 1.6. 63, he's got 3.2 million. At 70, he's got 6.4, but he's going to live longer than us. At 77, he's got 12.8. At 83, which is my life expectancy is beyond 83, he's got 25.6 million. At 90, he's got 51.2. At 97, he's got 102.4 million. Does anyone think 10% per annum on an ongoing basis is going to be a bit of a challenge? We'll all be bloody billionaires. You know, seriously, crikey, that's a high rate of return. I'm not quite sure where it comes from, you know. That's why I love the scams which pretend 50% per annum, forever trying to get them to come on TV. And all I want them to do when they're offering share trading systems that make you 60% per annum, all I want to do on TV is tell them, why are you telling anyone? Because if you start with 100 grand, you're richer than Rupert Murdoch in 12 years, you own the earth in 27 years and the universe in 34. Why would you tell anyone? Because they're crooks. Anyway, the panel are not crooks. And I'm delighted to introduce your panel to you today. John, come on up. You know John. Now, we've also got Arnie Selvager, CEO of Bell Direct, an online broker. Come on up and come, Arnie. Jane Irwin, we go to full service, Chief Operating Officer of Patterson's. Thank you very much, Jane. And this is a good one for me. Representing millennials, we've got trotting up now Rebecca Pritchard. And she's a financial coach, gladiator, and specialises in young investors, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to perch myself down here. Now, John, you gave me the world's easiest lead-in, and you said it's millennials. So now what I was hearing is they're interestingly more conservative. You and I have a bit of a chuckle about this, is that like my children, like any, you know, they're 30, 27 and 22, so they think I'm an idiot, which is appropriate. And so they go, oh my God, Dad, you know, couldn't you just get a proper job than all the entrepreneurial stuff you do? So you are right, my 3 children, I think I'm a raving maniac and are far more conservative than I am, and they're hoping I'll die before I use the money to buy a bigger boat. So, you know, is that the deal?
Yeah, I think obviously that's right, Paul. It's very surprising about their risk aversion. It obviously can be shaped by what their economic experiences have been growing up, what their parents' experiences have been when they've been doing on-exchange or property investments, and that's obviously different to what their parents faced. And if there were any challenges with that their parents faced in the share market, that could be leading to some reticence. Also, the income that they have available could be a problem as well. If they're having any challenges with cash flow, which is, I think, a polite way of saying they're having challenges keeping money in the bank and not giving it all over to international travel or smashed avocados, that'll obviously affect their share market investing as well, I think.
Bell Direct. Now, we hear the millennials are more savvy, but I get the point. I'm probably not going to go to your site if all my money has gone on smashed avocados. What's your experience? What's your age range?
Our average age range is about 45.
Oh, okay, that's actually younger than I thought, okay.
Yeah, but so there is a large influx of younger generation investing. My observation is that they prioritise convenience and simplicity than on investment outcome. And for me, that's a concern and a worry. And I think what's happened globally and starting to happen here in Australia is we're delivering easier investment options, but they're not necessarily delivering a better investment outcome. So I think as an industry, and certainly what we're spending our time thinking about is how we can actually create better product for them, which is somewhat simpler.
Simplicity.
Yeah, so simplicity is robo, and my own view, and it may or may not be shared by others on the panel.
Oh, we don't want them to share it, we want a good row here.
Yeah, so my view is that robo is maybe too simple and may not necessarily deliver the right investment outcomes.
So, help me here. When you say simple, does that mean it's an ETF or what does simple mean? We're talking. We'll stick with millennials, and obviously I'm going to come to you very shortly. But and Jane, I'm fascinated in your. So if we can just stick with millennials for the moment and try and keep the order, then we'll move to where you want to go. Yep. So you're saying they want simplicity. Does that mean simplicity is I buy BHP, or is simplicity you offer something that gives me better diversification on a one click, or what do you do?
Correct. So easy to action. So simple to join, simple to transact, simple to understand. And
but do they want diversification? Do they know what diversification is? I presume they want high returns with low risk.
I don't think they are really thinking about diversification at this point.
Good.
I think they're thinking about what's easiest to do.
Really?
Yeah. And I think they prioritise that over a potential investment.
So what do they do on your site? Do they tend to look at a bit of research first, or how do they must come to you because they've got money or something's happened to them to come to you?
Yeah. So yes, so they join and they might start with a small investment, maybe $1,000 or $2,000 worth.
So they'll buy a share of.
Correct. And generally, the decision's based on a tip that they've received.
Terrific.
So if you ask online investors, the number one thing that they look more for from their online broker is investment tips, recommendations.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Full service, Jane. What's happening in your world with millennials?
I don't think so. That's where Bell Direct and everything comes into play. What we are seeing is people being interested in products that they like, so Snapchat, IPO, things like that. So that is getting into diversification. People are thinking more globally, but as far as other asset classes, I think they're saving up for their property.
So the old dinosaurs like me, man, look, I fail. I'm forever trying to drag my 3 adult kids to meet our various advisors. You get, because in a sense, I would have made my kids' lives much easier 50 years ago because I'd be dead. But I'm kind of hanging around, and as my kids say, Dad, your income's going down, your expenditure's going up. This is not looking good. This is not looking good for us. But do you get this millennials topic? Do you get your clients trying to bring the young adults in?
We do. There's a lot of concern around intergenerational wealth transfer, and first generation makes it. By the time it gets to the third one, they're the ones that blow it. So. There's a lot about educating their children. I see a lot of parents that get all their advisors together, so whether or not it's their financial planner, their broker, their accountant, and make sure that they have those relationships to protect the family money down the line. But once again, that is for people who would be kind of high net worth individuals. And there is a huge demand for people who are in the savings journey investing into the market. And I think where a full service broker can help with advice, it should be there, but it's a price point problem, particularly for millennials. They look for low cost and good technology.
Oh, well, let's talk to the closest representative of the millennials. What are you seeing, hearing? I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, I'm sure I'd say I certainly wanted to make a living when I started IPAC. I mean, we all want to do the right thing, but it's nice to feed your own family as well. So obviously, you've got a business model in mind. So presumably, are you actually, so your millennials are your great interest?
Millennials are actually our exclusive interest.
You're exclusive.
So we work just with Gen Y, which is largely because we are Gen Y, and we understand, we practice what we preach. It's interesting to sort of reiterate Arnie's point. It's around ease of access with investing. It's around transparency of fees, and if it's in your hand, you are far more inclined to do it. So having these platforms is really important for our members to be able to invest, to connect, to see it.
Okay, well, you've given me an easy line here. You said, we practice what we preach. Now help me here. I'm not sure. I think I'm just a dinosaur. So practice what you preach. What is that? What are you preaching? What are you practicing?
So the key with the Gen Y cohort is really around building the connection between why they're investing, not investing for the sake of it. It's not a buzzword around I must invest in the same way that I guess we've been brought up we must buy houses. It's around investing for a purpose and connecting with that, which we find is far more sustainable to have longevity with it. It's far less likely to sell out, exit at an opportune moment if you know exactly why you were doing it in the first place.
So help us here. So you're kind of, I mean, you are trying to, I can see you use the word coach beside your name. So you're, in a sense, they might come to Arnie to buy a share. They'd come to you to have a broader conversation
around your goals.
So we're back to, if you like, more classic financial planning, which bluntly firms like mine don't do for millennials. And Jane, we have all sorts of problems around the cost of advice and FOFA and all sorts of stuff that's probably a bit hard for this meeting. So I think it's really fascinating what you're doing. And obviously, you're not a silly person, so it must be working for you in a business model. That's not what we want to talk about today. We're more interested in is these young folk. You must have. I noticed you're wrinkling your nose a little bit when the smashed avocados came up.
I just personally don't like avocado.
No, that really pisses my adult children off no end. It really gets their goat because they regard themselves as hardworking, intelligent. Whereas the smashed avocados thing sounds like a spoilt brat, doesn't it?
It does, and we talk often about the concept of value, and if having 2 coffees a day is really valuable to your day, then buy your coffee and feel really good about it. There's other ways to make cash flow savings. Likewise with avocado.
Though there, and this is, we are here to talk about, is shares is a fascinating one, and obviously it's kind of always, in a sense, I've always chuckled a bit about the Australian property thing, because obviously property is a secondary asset to business. If business is buggered, I don't have a property. Shares are part of a business. So in my opinion, a share is a first order asset. And if that is going well, I've probably got a job. But if all my shares are worth nothing, property's buggered anyway. So I've always seen property as as really for me as a second form asset. It's behind a successful economy, which in my opinion is shares. We hear a lot about this banging on about, the housing affordability crisis. How really, the people you talk to, my kids don't seem particularly, they say, why would we own a house? I mean, how stressed are the people you talk to about my dream? I want my children to own a house. Because as my wife says, if they own a house near us, they'll never get away because of the mortgage. And I kind of get that. But I presume you're hearing different messages from millennials, which has got to be good for shares, I'm thinking.
Absolutely, and it's relatively split. You've got the people who are really invested in it. And if you probe them a little bit deeper, it's actually not about the house. It's very much linked to security and stability and family values. Then you've got the other side of the equation where people are like, I don't know where I'm going to live in the next 5 years. I don't know what career I'm going to pursue. I might be taking any kind of sabbatical in and out of the workforce, that flexible lifestyle. And in that regards, property makes very little sense, at least as a main residence. And so shares naturally fast do fit into that equation a lot easier. And it gives them that flexibility, as well as obviously being easier to access because you can get started with a lot less.
Okay, look, while we're with the millennials, let's switch. Let's move into robos. I mentioned a while back, I'm chairman of this small listed company InvestSmart, which is Intelligent Investor, and it's a robo. And again, we agree with you. Simplicity, low cost, transparent, open. It feels a bit like IPAC sort of 34 years ago, and I launched IPAC, and we started Australia's first fee for service business. And you need to remember that the reason I started doing money stuff in 1979, I started doing some money talk on 2GB. The only reason I did that is we didn't have a marketing budget. It's the only way I could think of finding some customers. But in 1979, 3% of Australians owned a share. 3%. Isn't that extraordinary? And to see a share broker, you needed to get a written introduction. You couldn't even ring and make an appointment. And this is a true story, by sheer fluke, the first one I wandered into was Renaud Rifkin. He was a character. Believe me, he was a character. And in his reception, he had that famous old Kelvinator fridge that Arthur Boyd had painted. And Arthur Boyd, did you remember? Alice, you're an old bloke. Did you remember that? Do you remember the Arthur Boyd fridge, the old Kelvinator in the reception there? Yeah, and I think it was about, I remember saying to you, what's the deal? I think it was about 6% to buy and 6% to sell, and it really was a different era. So let's not for one second be overly critical of ourselves or anyone in this room. To see the percentage, to see the change in consumer behaviour and the opportunities, I think we should be critical. But on the other hand, we should celebrate the difference to only 38 years ago. You weren't even born, or not even close to it. But there really has been quite significant change. So millennials, what I'm hearing is that low cost. What else am I hearing? I'm hearing low cost and simplicity. I'm hearing that maybe my wife and my preoccupation with 20s kids owning a house is maybe not their preoccupation. Maybe they want more flexibility. John, please.
It's the second biggest reason for investing in shares is to save a deposit for a house. So it's true that partly people will be putting money in shares if they are not thinking about a house right now because they're not sure where they're going to live. Part of the reason why they are investing in shares is to get your 7.5 years factor going on so that they can be ready in 5 or 10 years' time for it. So it does play a role in why they're doing the shares.
Rebecca, would you back that up?
Yeah, we quite often use that as a strategy with people who are just watching property prices go up and seeing their 2% interest rates in the bank.
So home ownership remains valid, but because of career flex, like my son, I'm working in Singapore now. I'm working in Sydney now. I've been moved to Singapore. So interesting. He does save through shares.
Definitely, and it's got the added advantage of being. There's a bit of a barrier between you and your money in terms of discipline, and actually having something over there, far more inclined to rack up that deposit faster than if it was just in an easy access, high interest saver.
Okay. So, Jane, are we just going to sort of niche out here? I mean, people often say to me, how can you be on the board of IPAC, which is a traditional boutique, relatively high cost and high service, high touch, Honestly, we tried to tell our clients they'd pay less money if they came in 3 times a year, not 4. They had a spazzy. They like that. They like that touch, and so I'm really all for cutting your suit. So I'm really cool about the fact, we've got a younger, we've got someone, in your case, more like an IPAC, a full service model. In a sense, we could argue you're maybe the newer world with an online model. But surely all of these things are going to coexist, aren't they, Jane?
Absolutely, and I think robo is actually really important. There's a different niche for each age group or where people are at with their savings. And you've got robo, then you're going to cyborg. There is value in advice. Cyborg, so
oh God, what's that?
A robo-type basis for
a robo-type basis,
but then advice layered on top. So it's a partial human aspect to a robo.
Why couldn't that be robo with advice? Why does it have to be cyborg? It sounds like one of those things my kids used to watch on TV.
Because we love a buzzword.
Alistair, why have I not been informed about cyborg, and do you know about it? Thank you.
That sounds scary to a certain demographic, but for young people, they are much more open-minded about receiving advice from robo-advice. It's 30% of young people who are open-minded about that. It's half that for people who are in some of the later demographics. So for the generation that's used to getting a taxi by opening up an Uber app or getting information by typing into Google, for them, getting investment information from a robo-advice is obviously just something that's a lot more natural for them.
Okay, well, look, that's where the money's going to be. But the reality is that myself and my fat bunch of overprivileged baby boomers, bad luck youngsters, we control the dough, we ain't dying. So we'd better talk about where the money is. Can I get you to kick us off? I mean, my mob, I was born in that privileged group of people, born in 1955, which meant I've been in the voter rump all of my life. So therefore I had a free uni education. Why did I get the free uni education? We're the voting bloc. Bad luck, kids. Right now, youngsters, you're all paying your uni fees, and your clients are paying their uni fees. My kids pay their uni fees. So what's happening at the moment? Money's pouring into healthcare. Why is money pouring into healthcare? We want it. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we're driving housing prices up because we can compete with any young home buyer using negative gearing, which is a complete joke and should be banned in housing. That'll go down well. I've been saying that for decades, by the way. And then we let superannuation funds to gear so I can even compete even more harshly against first home buyers. That's a moment of genius, isn't it? Anyway, it's about shares today. So, John, so the 8 million fat, rich, lazy bastards like me, and I'm not joking about rich, by the way. You do realise, forget average wealth. You do realise that obviously Australians are the second richest people on the planet on average, at about $340,000 behind the Swiss. What is wonderful about our country, and something that I will vote against my own interest to defend, is the median Australian. For example, a median Australian, what are we, 24 million odd people, a bit less. The 12th millionth person, the middle person in Australia, that person in Australia is worth about 240,000 American dollars. So, about 12 million people are worth less than 240, 12 million are worth more. In America, you want to find social dislocation. In America, that median person is worth 52 grand. 170 million Americans are worth less than 52 grand. How pissed are you? Seriously, it's tough. And so one thing we've done well, better than most, is spread wealth. That's great for the share market. It's great for business. More importantly, it's an Australia I would prefer to see. I don't want wealth aggregating at the top 5%. Thank you very much. And I think there's some good stuff's happening around that. But the reality is that we baby boomers still control a stack of money. Jane, they would be your customers in the main?
95%.
Yep. And they're getting older.
Yes, they are. Which is okay, just keep alive, keep paying your fees.
Keep on. Yeah. Good, eh? Arnie, they must be important to you. You said average age 45, so obviously you've got a lot of my packer coming into Bell Online.
So I think what you're finding is, and our research shows that there's about 72% of people who have an advisor also have a self-directed account. So they're getting their advice from their advisor, but then executing a lot of their trading by themselves. So I think that's been the biggest shift in the last 5 years.
But I mean, look, I can understand in the old days, that's why I started IPAC as a fee-for-service advisor 34 years ago, because that way, in a sense, if you're charging a fee. But one of the things that we kind of said, well, if you're paying us a fee for advice, you don't need to pay for the investment process. So why would you pay for a fee for advice and implement elsewhere? Or do you implement more cheaply than the advisor can? Why?
Yeah, so we can execute a tenth of the cost.
Isn't that two meetings for the client? Wouldn't they rather their advisor come to you and implement, or is that not real life?
I think there's an overarching issue here in that they're becoming more cynical about advice.
Oh, absolutely.
So they are...
Like trading. Trading's fun.
Yeah, and they like to execute. It's about control. It's about having a bit more involvement in their wealth.
Oh, that's a good thing.
So, but I think that the bigger issue, or the deeper issue, is that they are becoming a little bit more cynical about advice. So they're trying to do things themselves. They are not as confident that they can do it all themselves. So they still want some connection to an advisor. But I think the opportunity for us as an industry is how we mould and evolve that advice model, so that rather than it becoming a relationship, they can dip in and dip out on a transactional basis. And I think that's what we were talking about it with Cyborg.
Absolutely.
I hadn't heard that term either myself. But its ability to have some kind of automation and simplicity around how the execution occurs, but having an advice layer, but in a way that the clients want to engage with advice.
Okay, so I guess I suspect, Jane, that in your firm and IPAC, I mean, I think a problem we would have. We recently IPAC got pinged in a recent ASIC shadow shopping thing because Greg Medcraft sits on one of the government boards I chair. Greg was able to laugh about a cup of coffee, and he said, "Oh, Paul, you've been pinged 3 times in shadow shopping." I said, "Oh, bloody hell, this is going to go down well. What have we done?" And he said, "Oh, 3 people walked into your firm with, and the shadow shopper had 10,000 to invest." And he said, and he's laughing his head off. And he said, "Where I'd like to congratulate you, but to formally reprimand you, is that one of your advisors took each of the 3 people, two took them out to a coffee shop and spent 20 minutes and just said, look, we are not spending $3,000 doing a full statement of advice for you to tell you how to invest $10,000. We are ripping you off. Tell us something quickly about yourself." 2 got told to pay off their mortgage and 1 got told to top up their super. And Medcraft said, "Paul, you've done the wrong thing, but thank you for that. It's exactly what we expect to happen." But we do have all of these constraints. And surely that, in a sense, is if someone walks into you with $10,000 to invest,
it's not worth either side's time, really. There's actually better options for the clients through robo-advice or going direct into equities, which is a problem because financial advice is something that has become unachievable for a lot of people, and a lot of people need it. So having those kind of lower cost price points for advice is really important.
Yeah, so I think what we're really trying to say, we're not trying to sell any particular point. What we're really saying is, I really feel that whether you're robo or whatever you are, that I really like all the colours on the smorgasbord. Yeah, I really think that's important. Do you tend to bump into any of your young millennials? Do they say you need to talk to my mum and dad?
They do. We very politely refer on to other firms.
Not our cup of tea. You really are firm in your niche.
Absolutely, and we've
got all the money.
Grow old with us. Well, now, but
okay.
Not forever.
Hang on.
And where that money flows down to. It might have made sense 30 years ago for a 70-year-old who passes away to pass on their wealth to a 30 or 35-year-old child. But what sense does it make for a 90-year-old who passes away to pass their wealth on to a 60-year-old who's probably got a fair bit of wealth themselves as well? And obviously it's the younger generations who could do with a bit more for housing and for a lot of their other needs in raising a family. So I think that raises a broader social question just about how younger generations can obviously
but you've also raised a totally relevant issue for this meeting, is that, for example, in this room, no, you're far too young. Oh no, Ian, you're with me. But how many people have I've got a DIY with my wife Vicky. Like we're one of the hundreds of thousands of the damn things. How many? I wonder how many of those folk have actually gone. DIY actually means do it yourself. So at what point in time do I lose the capability to do it myself? Now we've actually got it's going to be a hard one for the kids to call on the power of attorney they've got it. But someone's going to have to make a judgment when I've lost the plot. And we've already nominated where our DIY fund is going, and it's going to a major super fund that's got one of those 3 basis points, as in 0.03%, global indexed option. 0.03%, for God's sake, isn't that a wonderful world? Oh, I know plenty of those at 0.03% out there these days. So I've actually thought that one through. But now back to you three. Oh no, you're dealing with the young, but they'll be worried about their parents like me losing the plot. You're going to get younger people in time to come going, the old boys lost it.
Can we find more that people just assume their parents will spend it all, and we just have to work on the assumption?
No. It's critical we force you to believe this.
You have to stand on your own 2 feet. You've got to
No,
fend for yourself.
no. It's critical. I mean, the trouble is my children are the age now where they just cuckle. Because if you're an ageing baby boom, what have we all done? So many of us in this room. What we've done is that I can only think of 1 year in my life where I spent more than I earned. And that was January 1990, where Vicky and my mortgage hit 18.75%. And we had 2 young children, and we were absolutely screwed over. And we weren't going to lose the house. We sold 2 cars, and we extended our mortgage, and we survived. And property prices probably went down 30% that year. But you know what property's like. If the population's growing, you hang in there, you're okay again. But that's probably the only year we spent more than we earned. And I'm banging onto the kids about bigger boats, and the kids know full damn well when they reach sort of my kid's age, 30, 27-ish. The 22-year-old's still half convinced I'll spend all of it, but which we're working on really, really hard. But the reality is that we are just, the problem you will have your parents, I'm sure you know I'm talking the truth. We want you to be self-sufficient, we want you to do your own thing, but the reality is we've spent all of our lives spending less than we earn, and it is an incredibly painful behaviour. Don't you find this with your clients, Jane? I'm telling our clients all the bloody time, going, oh my God, I can't afford to go on holiday this year, the market's down 1%. For Christ's sake, you're going to die so rich it doesn't matter. Will you bugger off? Yeah. And they're going, oh, the children, oh, for heaven's sake, how much did your parents leave you? And they go, oh, well, there were 7 of us, about $5,000 each, but we're going to do better. We're actually going. No, we are going to pass money to you. So this conversation, John, what do we do with our DIY? Are we planning this transition? You've made a cracking point. I love that Death Clock website. My wife's annoyingly healthy, so she gets 102. I lie about what I drink, and I get 93. And if I'm honest, I get 88. Let's say Vicky does get into her 90s, and we potentially leave. We know it's nonsense. We're leaving money to a nearly 70-year-old child is nonsensical. So Jane, that must be a huge subject of conversation for full service.
It is, and there is a lot of discussion as well. Like during that process before you're 90, is there points that you give children an injection help them into the property market and stuff like that? I mean, you want them to stand on their own 2 feet, but you also don't want to see your kids struggle. And it's about how you're going to pass it on. And so much now the advice has changed, like for a full service stockbroking company to encompass broader advice, estate planning, superannuation strategies. And that's, when you're talking DIY, it's probably stuff that people can't be doing themselves. And that's where a value of an advisor comes into play.
Any views on that, Martin? Around this sort of transition?
Yeah, so we're typically not advice business, so we don't kind of get involved in this. But it comes back again to, I think there's a large proportion of Australians who are not getting advice but need it. So I think it's incumbent on us as an industry to create options for them for exactly those reasons. It's about intergenerational transfer of wealth and particularly around wealth creation in the process while they're in their accumulation phase. So I think technology helps us. But certainly there's a gap in the market at the moment in terms of helping those clients get advice.
Okay. So what are you going to do, folks? We're not a whole lot. We need to get to Q&A as well. So just mull for a moment. I'm going to ask each of you for a wrap-up statement in a moment about what each of you think is important, please. Now, we've spoken about millennials. We've spoken about robo. What's the new term I've learned? Cyborg. Who made that up? Does anyone with Cyborg, do you think, what are that TV show where things animate into stuff? Cyborg has sort of a bit of I don't know, it sounds a bit fierce to me.
Cyborg just means part robot, part human.
Oh.
That sounds so simple.
That's what it means.
Oh, really?
So if you think about that...
Cyborg, part human.
Yeah.
Oh.
So think about that in advice
Boy,
terms,
I'm up
sense.
on technology. Welcome to dinosaur land, folks. Don't bother looking for me on Facebook. I don't know how to work it. All right, okay. All right, let's go to this wrap up. John, you've done this report. Now, what's really? I know we got your stuff. What's really important?
I think for me, moving out of the normal economics discussion into the investment discussion, it's to say that people have in their own hands their future about what they can do for investing. And I think looking at this report, it says that you don't have to know what's happening in the Greek sovereign debt crisis to be able to get more involved in investing. You don't have to worry so much about government policy as well. I mean, the research shows that tax or other policy concerns are down the list for people as well. And for the most part, just thinking about risk, return and what's right for you puts power back in the hands of individuals to think about what's going to be in their best interest for the future.
Okay, Jane.
My biggest thing from the report was probably more around diversification, and I think we live in an exciting time that it is possible for people to diversify, and the more education that we can do, there is so many more products coming onto the exchange, the growth of ETFs. I think we've got a lot of ability to make sure that Australians are well covered and to have broader share ownership by clients, by people around Australia.
Just, I don't want to reopen the debate, but just to pick you up on that, I presume that you're finding that the typical Australian is still far too underweight international in terms of genuine diversification?
Well, our clients would be underweight most things apart from Australian equities, and so there's a big discussion.
Underweight everything but banks.
Yeah, pretty much, yes. They're probably a little overweight banks. So, I mean, international's getting so much more easily accessible for people, and the cost of entries come down, but it is also, property investment through the exchange or fixed income.
Right.
There's a lot more interest in that now. People are more aware, and we'll keep working with investors.
Your generation's in there saying, well, hang on a sec, you might need more than that. So what's your wrap-up on all this?
My wrap-up is pretty much that our generation has to just get over all the knowledge, get their head around it as much as they can, but learn as you go. Looking at the report in terms of the expectation of wealth at retirement, it's awful.
Retirement, that's a silly word.
It's such an awful word.
That's a silly word for your generation, isn't it?
We actually don't use the word retirement at Wealth Enhancers. We call it financial freedom, long-term financial freedom. So the message is actually just get investing. Don't get your knickers in too much of a twist around exactly what it is right now. Just get moving, get started really small, build it as you go, learn as you go. When you have that skin in the game, it does become a lot more interesting.
Yep.
So just get off your ass and get moving.
Knowledge. Yep. Do something.
Do something.
Okay.
It's not rocket science.
Yeah, no. Thank God for that. Arnie, what's your wrap-up?
So it's similar to Jane's, and it's really around diversification. But I think what's happened, or what's available now, is that we can get that diversification just on the ASX. So what wasn't possible previously is you can do this now. You can get ETFs, which means you can get global exposure or to other asset classes. You can use M fund or managed funds, so you can access now, any asset class effectively through the M fund, access to listed investment companies, and obviously access to Australian equities. So if we can communicate that to the broader marketplace, they can actually access and get fully diversified through one channel, rather than what would have been quite difficult for them to do five years ago.
Okay. Thank you. Now, question. You have a time for questions, do we not, Jackie? Cool. Anyone want to throw something at? I see you've got dinosaurs and millennials, and you can. If anyone wants to ask about cyborg advice, I'd be thrilled to hear the answer. Okay. Anyone got a question, folks?
I do have a question, Paul. I'm not sure who this is directed to, so I'll let you direct it. It's more about financial education. And I know you've talked about how in schools they've started doing it, but I think there's a large portion of the population who really don't understand investing or shares. And I'd use the example of my wife, because I know she's not here.
Oh, God, this is going to go down well.
And she doesn't understand, she can use an ATM machine, but where does she go to get basic information about investing? What does the share market do? I mean, the ASX does a lot, but I'm not sure there's a great source of general information about how you invest.
Yeah, I guess the government would argue, with my government hat on, we'd obviously the Money Smart website's been unbelievably, in terms of just generally good information. But Alistair, it's still the most common question I get 34 years later. I was doing a talk this morning for a bunch of senior execs, and it's who do we trust? We got Arnie, you've gone down this route about, and in a sense, and I know with I keep rotating hats here, but I'm trying to be as transparent as I can. With my IPAC hat on, I cringe when I see the banks slammed for poor advice, because at the end of the day, we all get tar and feathers on us, unfortunately. And so I hate it when Australians lose confidence in the advice process. That makes me sad. You probably applaud, and that's perfectly fair enough. No, that's how an economy works. I'm cool with that one. So, Alistair, the only solution that, with my government hat on, we have to that one is in a sense, our view is we don't want to talk about a lost generation of adults. But you go to the ANZ longitudinal survey, which has obviously been going for many years now, and we find it fascinating. It sits really well with your report, John. And in there's a wonderful piece of research where one question is you're asked how confident you are about investment decision making, and particularly men. We had 63% of men in the last ANZ study say they are very confident about making investment decisions, and about 30 questions later there's a question on risk and return, and it turns out 63% of men are confident about making investment decisions, but 62% of men wouldn't take risk and return into account. Now, clearly not the same numbers, but clearly there's an overlap there, right?
Yeah.
You know, we've got the majority of the male population covered. And yet we find, interestingly, with females, you do find there's actually, there seems to be a much longer term vision. Now, you're giving your wife grief. One place my wife is definitely right is my wife says, look, as long as there's a 6-pack of beer in the fridge, you're long term happy. Whereas she has much more of the kids and, superannuation in 20 years' time and stuff. So we've got all that stuff. That's why the smorgasbord of education needs to be quite wide. You can't. I know at InvestSmart, and as you would do at Bell, and all of us would. We'd have various ways, and we would all argue. And I think we do this genuinely with good heart. We know that information's important. I guess, Alistair, what we would argue is that I don't want my baby boomer mob, but I don't think most of my you're my age. I don't think most of our mob is particularly good with risk and return. And I laugh hysterically when someone our age on a plane or something says to me, how much do I need to retire on? And I say, number one, retirement. Rebecca, you win all the points today. Retirement is a shocking word. You use freedom, I use financial independence. So I like to say I'm financially independent and I work because I find it stimulating. I enjoy it. And they say, they say, well, how much do I need to retire or be financially independent? And I was sitting on a plane out of London a while back. The guy sitting next to me is a CEO of a top 20 firm. And so we had a couple of champers. In fact, your favourite sort of champer, sir. We will finish up. And after a couple of days, he said, oh yeah, he said, I've got your book, I've never read it. And I said, yeah, thanks for that. And as the Financial Review said a while back, Paul's book is the only book in Australian history to be bought 600,000 times and read once. Anyway, but that's part of Alistair. That's part of the answer. The problem is we'd rather plan our holidays. It isn't this. And this guy ended up saying, he said, oh look, how much do I need to give up work? And I said, well, how much do you spend? He said, I don't know. And I said, well, here, I've got your annual report. You earned 2.6 million last year plus bonuses. How much you got left? And he said, not much. And I said, well, for God's sake. He said, well, how about 300,000? And I said, well, it looks to me as though you spent 2 million last year. And he said, I won't need to buy suits. Well, but this is to the point. How much do everyone in this room, I'm not going to ask you, can each of you tell me how much you need to be financially independent? I've got some nodding heads. Well done, madam. Because it really gets down to a conversation about, do you want one car or two? Do you want a Mercedes or a Toyota? Do you want a 6-foot tinny or do you want a sailing boat? And do you find, Jane, do people answer those questions very well?
Well, they try.
Or you help them to?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what
they're
paying us for. That's the advice process, is making sure that expectations is a reality. A lot of people come with goals that aren't achievable, and so it is important to look at that. I mean, what do you want as opposed to what do you need as to what's actually going to be achievable.
Okay, so I think then, to finish up, I think that's a big part of what Robo does and what MoneySmart tries to do on our government ASIC website is we think really fun play models that allow people to model their future life and put a price on it. In other words, are able to do that with a planner or are actually able to play games online, and sometimes it frightens the crap out of them. Maybe that's a good or bad thing. But that's I think, Alistair, I think we need a smorgasbord, but at the end of the day, I think most would still rather plan our next holiday, and that is a challenge for us. And it's an ongoing challenge for everyone in this room. So Ian is telling me if we don't finish soon, we're all going to die of old age, particularly Ian and myself. So I would like to say thank you all very much. Thank you to the Stock Exchange. Stock Exchange, well done for doing this report. These reports are just so important to us as a community of people. They're government policy for commentators. So thank you very much for doing this report. Ladies and gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming. Please thank the panel.